Alright, hello, sorry about that. I am back right now. This is still April 14th, it's still 2010, it's still Day and Night Daily number 101, and I should sound a little bit better right now, and if I don't, then whoops. Anyways, just going to check out 3 games from KawaiiRice, who's doing some early expand games against a guy named AZZ. I'm going to call him Az. Because again, I must not be inappropriate. I'm just going to go ahead and log in right here as well. Ah, yes, greetings, BattleNet. Fantastic. What's always so cool when you get the chance to watch 2 players play multiple... Actually, I should say, anytime you get to see 1 player play multiple games in a row, that's always so helpful because you get the chance to see little adjustments they're making over time. But in particular, it's awesome to see 2 players have multiple games against each other in the row because then you can truly see how the little adjustments are going on both ends. So we're just going to come over here to the main screen. We have Socrates, who is our friendly young American Terran player, KawaiiRice. And then on the right, we have Az, who's playing Protoss. This is a ladder game. They played 3 games in a row. And the game is Metalopolis. So they're just kind of having some random little chats. I don't know if that's because they were planning this or if they were just testing some stuff out. But from what I understand, this was a ladder match. Now, we're on Metalopolis. I'm just going to pretend that they're not typing. This expansion, it seems nice and juicy, right? Our ramp points directly towards it. It's a pretty standard-looking natural, I mean, but the issue is that if I just move up a little bit, here I'm actually even going to select all these minerals, you'll note that there's this huge wide-open area. Holding an expansion is obnoxious on this map. Oh, God, I hate it. And in particular, not only is holding the expansion obnoxious, but there's this huge concern you have, which is what position is your opponent. If, for some reason, the Protoss is here in this top right position on the minimap, just follow with me as I go down the ramp, and as we scroll down, it is a straight walking path to this natural expansion of KawaiiRice. Whereas, if his opponent is here, cross-map, there's a huge distance. There's even 2 huge distances. Watch as I follow along here. I'm scrolling along up to the center, across the gold mineral patch, and down again, and all the way in between. So it's not only closer, in the if you're against the top right position, and it's not only longer if you're at the right position, but it's also easier to deal with if he's at the right because you have these Xel'Naga watchtowers here and over here, so you can do a lot of spotting in the middle of the map. So there's almost always a huge concern early on of how do I scout that guy early. I honestly think that people will be doing horizontal positions versus vertical positions after a while. If I'm at left and he's at top, I will play differently than if I'm at left and he's at the right or the bottom, which I think is the correct way to go about things. I think most players aren't going to be doing this sort of stuff yet. They're not going to be doing big considerations as to whether or not their opponent is a little bit closer or a little bit farther, but, that's for down the line. We already have a little bit of information. We see Socrates, a.k.a. KawaiiRice, doing a supply depot at his ramp. Very normal, and I want you not to take this for granted. People just do this. They build their stuff at their ramp because they can and because supply depots can burrow, which is awfully neat. But always be just a little bit conscious of this. So, for instance, if immortal drops become very big, then these supply depots at the ramp are a big vulnerability. Might want to take that into consideration. Perhaps here is the best location for supply depots because they're the most tucked away in between these 2 bases. But already, almost certainly, this is going to be, or at least it should, be an integral part of whatever early expand KawaiiRice has planned. So meanwhile, on Az's base, he's doing everything normally, except he's not chrono boosting, so that's a little funky. Oh, speak of the devil. Hello, chrono boost. You know what's funny? They're chatting like crazy, just being nice and friendly and everything. But every time I chat, it doesn't matter if I am super focused or not, I always make dumb mistakes. So, I mean, little things like not chrono boosting there could very well just be a little bit of a misstep that happens when you chat. So already I'm not noticing an early expand, or excuse me, a gas yet by KawaiiRice. Now this is something that Jinro and I affectionately call the Morrow build, which is where you go 1 racks straight into the expansion. And when Morrow does it, after he early expands, he throws down 2 barracks and just gets mass marine. He throws down these 2 barracks long before he gets either of these Vespene geysers. And we do need to talk a little bit about that because it's pretty significant. So most people against Protoss are just getting a lot of Marauders. But the huge concern whenever you're early expanding is how do you deal with some sort of 4 warp gate push? That's perhaps the most threatening thing when you're early expanding, because you won't really have that many units if you go for mass Marauder early on. And Protoss will just infinitely force field your ramp when he gets up to your face. So this is not good, obviously. So the way that Morrow's been dealing with this huge warp gate thing is that he's been getting his expansion up really fast, not gassing at all, and then getting 3 barracks and making a ton of Marines, huge amounts of Marines. It's actually a build that came up in Terran vs. Terran originally. And he will just overwhelm you. You'll come up with your 5 sentries, 2 zealots, and a stalker, and he'll have 16, 20 Marines. And you're like, whoopsie daisies, you'll kind of run away. And especially it deals with any sort of robotics facility junk really easily. Because he's going to come up with an immortal that the shield isn't going to be useful against the Marines because they do under 10 damage a shot. Marines aren't armored, so they're already taking minimum damage from the immortal. Great way to play. The issue that I have, though, is how do you deal with being aggressive later on in the game? Because you really do need stim to be effective against Protoss whenever you're doing those mid-game pushes. So I was trying to figure out ways to do earlier gassing type plays because I wanted to get stim early on. And I was trying to figure out a way to hold off a little bit more. So to sum up everything, we're worried about warp gate rushes. We're worried about immortals. If we get too many Marines, we don't get stim so fast. If we try to get stim and marauders too fast, we end up dying. So these are all the big things we want to consider. How can I be aggressive a little bit early? It looks like an SCV thought about going for a refinery, but it was a no-go. One thing I love so much about walling in is it hides our build quite a bit. Notice that KawaiiRice, his food doesn't need to... he didn't need to make that supply depot for his food. He hasn't even hit 19 yet, which meant that he would have been fine and well without one early on. But he got it just to do the wall off. And we already have a command center coming down. When this command center goes down, burrow this and move the Marines here so a scouting probe can't even get halfway up the ramp to see this. That's so important. Wall-offs help hide a lot of information. Putting it here, but of course good players are going to swing around a little bit. Once again, this is going to be a little bit more focused on the Terran side of things. Uh-oh, we see something Morrow-esque coming up. Oh, yeah, and you know what? Let's see, how do I'm going to pause for a minute, come back over here, because I am going to try to find a way to open up my buddy list here in order to cover up the replay bar. Because that way, there will be no need at all to... So that way it'll be spoiler-free and all that good stuff. So I'm going to see if I can do that. You know what? It's a little too big. And hell, this is education. This isn't a cast. So we're just going to go ahead and bounce right back. I will eventually get an overlay up there. But either way, yes, here we go. Here's the Morrow build. So I'm immediately thinking, how on earth is KawaiiRice going to be aggressive? I was saying before I interrupted myself so rudely, holy, 4 barracks. Ooh, baby. Oh, that's exciting news. Let's pause it. I was saying that this is going to be largely from the Terran's point of view, so we're going to frequently pop back here and just check up on what Az is doing. Comment a little bit on that, but, not excessively. Because we want to think about early expanding his Terran against Protoss. By the way, love that later second gas. I love that later second gas. It allows us to get a Stalker and this robotics facility out quite quickly. I do think that should be chrono boosted, though, because if we go to the Az cam, he literally has absolutely no idea what his opponent's doing. He has no sight of the buildings, whereas Terran has a pretty damn good idea where he's at. Oh, and a Marine trying to invade in my cast as well. Now, this is fancy. Remember, I was saying, how on earth is KawaiiRice going to be aggressive if he gets all these barracks early on? If he gets 3 barracks and no gas early on. Well, hell, he's not going to get 3 barracks. He's going to get a 4th barracks, and he's going to go hog wild. Still no gas. Ooh, double gas. Getting it out fast. He might transition into Mass Marauder after this and do a push without stim a little bit early. But this is so cool. This is just awesome. And we got 2 more replays of this, so we're going to get a chance to see if Az incorporates some more variety into his play. Already things we're noticing about this build, because you're getting these 4 barracks out mondo quickly, you are kind of low on money, so how do you go about getting the orbital command here at this expo? One thing to note, if your main command center is at 35 energy, if you start this orbital command, it will finish, and this thing will be at 50 energy. So in other words, that's how you sync up the energy on those two structures. So I wouldn't be surprised if one went down right now if we just saved up a little money. So I'm going to have these barracks selected for a little while because I want to keep tabs on these production. I don't know if you can see this very well, but there's little white dots underneath the barracks if he's producing out of them. So that will let us know if he actually can do that. Sometimes when players end up doing these builds where they get a whole bunch of unit-producing structures early on, they can't actually produce out of them, which I would argue is less than good. You can easily just get away with getting one less there. So it looks like we have some Marines getting ready. Ooh, throwing down some barracks. I just want to say that 6 minutes and 38 seconds between then and like 6 minutes and 50 seconds, that's when a 4 warp gate push will get to your base. I say 6:38 because that's the earliest time that I experienced it in practicing about 40 games in a row against it. Losing 39 of them, losing 39. But in that last game, oh boy, did I bring the noise. Yeah, but see, this is what's nice about getting all these bunkers, is that there's like no way you can ever die. Look, here comes an immortal, trying as hard as he can to get across the map. Oh god, I wish we were in horizontal positions. Okay, trying to get all the way there. And alas, there are 3 barracks there. And see, this is what I was talking about early on. These supply depots, a bit of a liability. Starting to think that maybe getting these depots isn't necessary. Maybe we can just get these Marines and send them to the bottom of the ramp, because this is obnoxious, especially when you're doing something as money-hungry as 4 barracks fast. You definitely want to be trying to avoid as many free buildings for your opponent as possible. Another thing I'm noticing, no use of gas yet. Double gas, no use out of it. Notice that I don't even think he spent any gas yet. So, you know, you could probably argue not getting that gas so early. Alternatively, maybe getting 3 barracks, early gas, and throwing down the tech labs. One thing that is so nice about all these Marines is that we can easily throw up these bunkers. And holy cow, time to go home, Protoss. Looks like we're adding on yet more Stalkers. What's the composition look like? Pretty much just pretty severely anti-ground composition, just getting a whole bunch of Immortals and Gateway units. Looks like he just finished Warp Gates as well. So Protoss wants to demolish, looks like more of a Marauder army, but against Marines, it might be a little bit less than good. And here's something real fancy that Az is doing. He's using the fact that it's range 6 on these Stalkers to exploit the range 5 on these Marines. And that was such a beautiful statue. People just rage out when their rushes don't work and try to destroy any doodad they can on the map. Fortunately, StarCraft 2 provides that ability. It's good to let the nerd rage out in-game as opposed to after-game. On some sort of inanimate object in the room. And look at this, already getting the reactor out early, getting the factory, sorry, lost the last syllable there, but we eventually found it. Getting more Marines. But still, that gas feels awfully early. Feels like a mighty early thingamajoo. These guys, yeah, this is way early. I definitely think we could have gotten away with not getting that. Tech Lab's now finished. Look at the time right now. 8 minutes and 53 seconds. This is what I'm talking about. And notice that Stim takes 140 seconds. You eventually get Stim at around the 10-minute mark. And that's generally when you have something like a 100 food army and you're getting ready for some sort of big push. I like pushing a little bit earlier against Protoss's, but I'm not going to lie. Protoss is feeling big pressure right here because KawaiiRice has early expanded. He has all these Marines. Protoss is desperately trying to add on more warp gates so that way he can hopefully keep up with production, but no expansion up yet. So that means that these Stalkers need to do a lot of damage. It looks like they're doing a pretty decent job right there, but kind of wish those Stalkers had 6.5 range. That way they could micro a little bit easier, or maybe if they just turned around and shot behind them more quickly, because they do spend a few milliseconds just turning, and if those weren't there, that would be totally bejugular. And I also like the fact that we're not seeing KawaiiRice abandon all Marines in favor of mass Marauders. Ooh, this is cute. Double factory. Fancy. He's not favoring just mass Marauder. He's still sticking to some more infantry. You can support 6-7 barracks off 2 bases as Terran. But I do like the fact that KawaiiRice is teching. He's not just trying to mass up Tier 1 units, which is a syndrome that we also saw in StarCraft. We see a lot of, StarCraft 1, I should say, or Brood War. A lot of players would just mass up Tier 1 units like this, and just try to get more Tier 1 units. You'd see Protosses going Zealot Dragoon and just trying to add on more and more gateways as time went on. Just trying to, jam the square rod into the circle hole, as they say. Just trying to force something to work that probably, honestly, isn't really going to work. So now we're actually, we're starting to see KawaiiRice now keep his gas low. So this is a big, super important lesson in resource management. A lot of players would look at their resources now and they would say, hey, it's fine the time I got my gas, because look, I eventually spent all of it. Instead, what you should do is you should note, okay, there is a point where I'm spending all this gas, and you shouldn't get the geysers so early. You instead should wait a little bit more, let your money build up, make more use of it, and then get double gas at both your main and your expo, and then surge forward in sync. Or alternatively, get one geyser in your main, get just enough gas to get the tech labs and the reactors and add on those, and then build 3 more refineries so you can surge forward with the gas. You just want to make sure that your gas is at 0 at all points, not just having your gas at 0 eventually. So I do like the basic structure of KawaiiRice's build, but I think it could be smoothed out just a touch, just a pinch there. And we're seeing a little bit of a gas shortage. So again, double gas here a little bit later, double gas here a little bit earlier, or something in between. And here comes a big scary Protoss bustin'. Oh my goodness, that's just a lot of stuff. Holy crap. Uh-oh. It looks like it's not quite gonna work out. So it looks like we do have a good game right there. So a lot of people would watch this game and they would go, I hate early expanding, you know. But I think, you know, let's actually go to this 8-minute mark here. Look at the position Terran was in. 55 food. Protoss, as I zoom into the Stalker, oh my god, he's the culprit. Look, 50 food. And Terran, if we just go to this income tab, look at the difference in income. Huge difference. KawaiiRice is pulling way ahead. He just salvaged these three bunkers, which is those explosion we heard. He is way ahead here. Way ahead. And I think too often people get results oriented. They're just like, well, I lost. I'm not doing that build anymore. And they'll go back and stick with their mass marauder antics. But always note that there are bits of truth in a game, even if you don't end up winning it. You can watch this game again as KawaiiRice and go, wow, I was in a good spot with this early expand. But he just got so many Stalkers and so many Immortals that there really wasn't anything I can do in that position. But let me try to tweak that a little bit. So, fortunately, I actually have 2 more games of KawaiiRice. So hopefully he ends up winning them and it wasn't just some hilarious troll post that someone made. Hey, look, here's a great way to early expand. He just like loses to Mass Stalker in every single game. which can happen. There's nothing wrong about losing to Mass Stalkers. That's nothing to be ashamed of. But coming right back, we're on Kulas Ravine. Again, this is from the ladder. Very technical map. Mondo crazy technical. And in particular, if we go down here to this expansion, actually a little bit below the expansion, as you can see on the mini-map down here, this area is so wide, it makes early expanding very difficult to defend without having a lot of stuff. There's a lot of cute technical defenses that the Terran can do with like tanks and some ghosts early on. None of that really works if you don't have a tight area to defend. So already as the Protoss, who was victorious in the last game, he's already feeling much more comfortable against a potential early expand because it's just so scary for Terran. So here comes KawaiiRice, aka Socrates. Yes, that's the real Socrates who's here playing StarCraft 2. Making a supply depot at his ramp. Again, I feel a little more comfortable making depots at my ramp on this map because there is a little bit... It's a little easier to deal with than it would be on Metalopolis. Like, for instance, on Metalopolis, when you build your depot, there's actually a space here where Stalkers and Immortals can shoot at it. But here on this map, it's a little bit more tucked away, and you only need 1 depot. Always good to be critical about pretty much everything in these early game stages, because there are situations where you want to wall in, other situations where you don't want to wall in the same position with the same race, but the only difference is the strategy you're electing to do. So that's why when I watch my replays, I generally don't times 3 for too far in. I normally times 3 to about the 1 minute mark, and then just go back down to fast. And I watch a lot of replays with people, because I'm not going to lie, I do want to pass the time. I'm not just some sort of nerd who just sits here with like my calculator and I have like my abacus and I'm measuring things and I'm putting my compass on the screen. Oh, we must analyze 24 hours a day. No way. But, you know, I like to be low-key. Watch on just faster, not faster times 6. Sipping a cup of green tea. Looks like we, again, don't have any sort of Vespene geysers coming up early. One issue with this map, if you put a Reaper here, you can shoot that gas. Hey, always go Reaper if your opponent's in the top right position. And we do have the Angry Zap, the taser from this probe, has to back off. Well, actually doesn't have to back off. SCVs are not strong like they were in StarCraft 1. Marginally stronger, but fight those SCVs a little more aggressively. Everything is normal as can be by Az. He is getting his cybernetics core. We don't have any units coming out right now. He has not gassed yet. He is chrono boosting. Most normal thing in the world. A lot of times players don't really want to bring this probe all the way back because they want to hang out at this Xel'Naga watchtower, which is like the most important formation on this map. Because if you're here, you can see all the way to this rim right here. So you know anytime there's ground units coming out. Again, smart move by KawaiiRice. He has his command center building a little bit farther back. Would like this Marine to be tighter, actually up on this top edge here. Again, nitpick every little thing you can. If you build it out this top edge here, it can kill any sort of scouting probe that would want to work its way up there to see that. Also, I kind of feel like this, you could get an SCV here a little bit earlier and poach your Marines farther forward to pick this probe off completely, so that way he has zero knowledge. He doesn't even know if you have a tech lab or not. Always just thinking of some way to deter information. Information retrieval? I don't know, something like that. You just don't want it to happen. And notice again, on this map, another little adjustment. Notice that this depot just now finished. It just finished. This command center was started before this depot. On the other map, Metalopolis, this depot was started before the command center. So a little bit of optimization going on by KawaiiRice. I still think he could do this same build on both maps if he just rallied his Marines a little bit farther forward like here to hold stuff off, and then relied on burrow for his supply depot. Getting more barracks. Some cool aggressive possibilities. We already have a Zealot who seems to be just guarding this gold mineral patch, making sure nothing funky is going on. Yes, the policeman of the right side of the map. Oh, cool, going for the destructible rocks early. It's definitely not going to work out, because honestly, if you have 4 barracks as Terran, oh my goodness, you're going to have an army. Holy cow. Still a Robo coming up early on, getting the Cybernetics core early on. How was Az able to do this? Well, he didn't get... didn't get a Stalker starting out. So again, cool stuff happens when you see neat players play multiple games in a row. He is going to be getting the Immortal out early on. I love that play on this map because you see this supply depot and this barracks up front, and you go, that looks so juicy. I want to destroy that. But as it turns out, none such things will be occurring. It's in fact KawaiiRice early expanding. But I love this mass barrack stuff, especially on this map, because what ends up happening is you have so many units to defend these huge wide open spaces. You could actually get away with fewer bunkers here. And KawaiiRice doing the smart thing, keeping Hawkeye on everything that's going on here. Ooh, more Zealots trying to knock down these destructible rocks. Yet another reason why we like getting these Immortals fast. Look at it, he's already aiming at these destructible rocks. Very cool stuff. I talked a little bit in one of the earlier Day 9 dailies about getting this Immortal up early on to destroy destructible rocks that were at gold expansions. But again, you can use Immortals for destroying rocks anywhere, and it looks like Az is using it to destroy the destructible rocks here on Kulas Ravine. So this SCV heard something in the distance, and uh-oh, wait a minute. But what's so cool, you know, there's a promise I'm going to make. I'm going to try to stop using the word again. I think if someone had like a notebook with a tally and they were recording how many times I said that in this cast, it would certainly make me blush. So I promise I'll try not to use that word so much, although it is one of my charming, heartwarming characteristics. But it looks like we do have 4 barracks continuing to pump out some Marines. Continuing to rally up here. Zealots are very monstrously strong against Marines. Marauders have that 1 armor, and because the side blades are broken into 2 attacks, the Marauders do significantly less damage. But this is what's cool about early expanding like this. SCVs become one of your greatest weapons early on. By the way, I do know I have the replay on fast. I just kind of wanted to watch this one a little bit more in-depth. Now this is going to be very one-sided. This is just not going to be close at all. Look at him. Yeah, sure, losing some SCVs, but it looks like Az lost everything. And see, Az is pointing out how strong it actually ends up being. Just using a bunch of Marines with SCVs early on. Now there's virtually no way that Az can hold off Marine aggression given this composition he has. He's going to try to warp in a handful of units, but whoops, they got lost. And more Marines popping out. And that's what I think is super interesting about this KawaiiRice decision to get 4 barracks early on. If you were doing Morrow's type of play, where you get the 3 barracks, you have to play a little bit more passively. So Protoss has free reigns to expand somewhere in there. In particular, has free reigns to get Colossi somewhere in there, which is very scary for this build. Or if you're trying to do what I was trying to do, try to get stim fast, you have trouble staying alive because they'll rush in with a bunch of anything, really. I mean, the 4 warp gates is the most notable one I struggle with, but immortals have also given me troubles every now and again. But if I was able to stay alive, I would be able to do some more mid-game aggression. And here it looks like KawaiiRice is saying, well, hell, I'll just get 4 barracks, and then I can do crazy stuff with my Marines early on. First game was a little passive, and got punished for that. Wasn't able to tech as quickly. But now in this game, we're seeing him just happily march forward, and look, even has a ton of Marines coming out. Using these 4 barracks as a tool to be aggressive early on. A later orbital command here, still like it. Still into it. As using awesome words like hence. Oh, one of my favorite things. I guess, it's actually dumb of me to ask if this was a ladder map, a ladder match, because as we can see, there's an observer in the game. I don't know why that didn't dawn on me at an earlier point in time. But 2 important things about that game. First of all, the fact that Kawhi was passive in the first game, and then when he was aggressive in the second game, there was very, very little that Az could do when he went for this faster robotics facility opening. But what I also like about that game is they were clearly testing something. They were clearly trying to check out how it ended up working out if the Protoss tried to bust down the back door on that map. If they tried to, do some sort of big charge at the start of the game, and they ended up holding it off relatively easily. Coming back onto the main screen, we do have the 3rd game of the series. Here's Socrates saying he's going to refuse something. Oh, man. What an awesome little fellow that KawaiiRice is. So, this map is interesting because the positions are so close, and I actually strongly favor KawaiiRice's build on this map because, again, if you follow with me, let us pause the game journey. As we go down the ramp, we have to go up a little bit, but then we can basically go straight, directly into the opponent's main. I mean, it is so close to start positions. And you heard me saying earlier on, ooh, man, if I'm early expanding as Terran against Protoss, I'm really freaking out on Metalopolis because the positions are so close and it's harder to defend. With Kawai's build, he might be going, oh, sweet, we're in close positions. I can just bust in there with a bunch of Marines early on. And that's exactly what we're also seeing here on Steps of War. That is a huge threat for Protoss, especially if he tries to do any sort of early immortal, early robotics facility antics. I'm very curious about this build against Colossus Rush, because that's something that came up in the first few days of beta, because as you will note, the Colossus is an undeniably kick-ass unit, so people just wanted to get it fast and go, oh my god, I'm like directing War of the Worlds from the aliens' perspective. But after a while, people realize that you just get a Viking and there's not really much you can deal with. You have to get some units beforehand. But with this build that we see KawaiiRice doing, the fact that he's getting so many barracks early on and delaying these 2 gas geysers, that I think it's going to be a big issue if Protoss can sneak away with that. Just sneak out those Immortals, or sneak out those Colossi really, really early. Perhaps Kawhi will just have to do some crazy huge pushes with Marines, and then transition into 4 barracks with Tech Lab, and just try to push aggressively against those Colossi. And see, look, we have a very early supply depot coming down. Not something that occurred on Kulas Ravine. And look at the timing. Sweet timing. Nice, nice, nice. Really, really well done. The fact that KawaiiRice is able to throw that down then. It gives them the opportunity to hide any sort of information. A little sparring going on. It looks like they're both tied in the jousting match. Probe should just kind of chill back and heal a little bit of shield, and then proceed to murder this SCV heartlessly. Here comes out another SCV, doing the angry zap. Now continuing to rebuild. A little bit of a misstep there. Got a little idle. He's just inspecting the left side of the map. But everything is returning to Normalville. Az doing the very standard thing. Curious if he's going to be getting the robotics facility. There's been a recent resurgence of robotics facilities in this matchup very quickly. Most players stopped getting robos because of because of Marauder Marine all-in, but with the recent adjustments in the patch, you can end up doing it. So players would get 2 more warp gates, one here early on, to do some pressure. So I'm really curious how Az is going to end up doing that. Both, I think, are very strong, going for the robotics facility first, or going for a whole bunch of warp gates first. So we do have Socrates, the clever young Terran, KawaiiRice, who recently went to the WCG 2009 finals for Brood War. Looks like he's getting his expansion down early on. Cool, we see more barracks going down. Look at that awesome economy. Already we can see that there's a nice little income advantage that KawaiiRice has, because he has those mules and he doesn't have any guys in the geysers, so we can throw down these barracks quite quickly. Continuing to flood with Marines here. And he's going to be getting a 4th barracks soon. Yes, indeed, there's a 4th barracks. Bringing me way out of that high octave range. Some nice moves. Oh, this is so beautiful. Notice how he went up here and checked. Oh my god, that's all the little stuff that you need to do in order to just stay afloat whenever you're doing something a little bit unorthodox, like 4 racks early expanding. Look, and he's checking around here for any sort of pylons. Great subtlety there. That is one of those huge boosts to your win rate. Because I'm going to say something that I've said to a lot of people in one-on-one discussions, like in email or on the internets, that most people seem to be a little surprised by. That I think that the D+, C- players in Brood War are pretty much doing the right things. For the most part, they get the overall unit compositions, they get the basic transitions, but it's the very little tiny subtle stuff that they end up missing out on. And when their strategy loses, they'll go, oh god, I need to find a new strategy, and they'll just try to switch over to whatever they can find instead of trying to perfect these little subtle techniques. So for instance, let's say you're KawaiiRice, you've been early expanding a lot, and you lost to some warp gate antics, where a guy built a pylon right outside your base and rushed right in there before you had enough Marines. Well, what you could do is do a completely different build, or you could do what KawaiiRice is doing and run around with this SCV and try to poke around all the edges of the map, look in every little nook and cranny. Sure, you end up maybe losing 30 minerals because that SCV could have had time mining, but you bump your loss percentage down by like 3, 4, 5%, because that's about the number of players who would do that warp gate thing to you and lose. Or what you'll end up having is players who will lose to drops in Brood War, and again, they'll try to switch their whole strategy, but what the good players will do is send their first Overlord to a weird spot on the map, because so far down the road later in the game, they need that Overlord in that position to spot a drop without having to spend money on some sort of early Overlord speed. And once you start adding up all those little tiny minuscule adjustments, that's why you heard me talking about those supply depots in the start, like, do we really want to wall in? Can we avoid that because they seem vulnerable? That's little considerations that help knock off 2 or 3% that eventually mean that your loss rate doing this drops from 40% down to like 5%. And I think that those those D+, C- players who are basically doing the right thing are only losing because they don't try as hard as they can to find these little subtle pieces. In fact, every time I go take a break from playing competitive StarCraft and I come back, the hardest thing is re-remembering all these little tiny rules I created for myself. So I end up with a lot of annoying losses when I come back. And an annoying loss is one of the most annoying things on the face of the planet Earth. And I would never wish it upon anyone. So look at this nice timing. Getting these Marines ready. Getting a little supply blocked, but building this command center a little bit earlier, which means that we don't necessarily need to build these barracks that early on. We could wait just a little bit. Instead of building a barracks when we have 150 3 times in a row, we could just wait till we have 450 and build all 3 barracks, and it would essentially be the same, and we would save a little bit of mining time on these 3 SCVs that we're building these barracks. Again, just a little tiny thing. Looks like, meanwhile, in Az's base, he is in fact getting this robotics, getting the fast immortal. Again, great stuff. Testing the same thing against each other multiple times in a row. Because if you do these tests where you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to early expand and I really want you to go for this immortal warp gate stuff, you will be surprised to find how both players can swing it in their favor by doing little tiny adjustments. And we have KawaiiRice adding on more little duties, more Marines. Hey, look at KawaiiRice engaging in an act of learning here, not building 2 refineries so early, saying, gee, I didn't use that I didn't use those refineries so early. I don't know if he necessarily talks like that when he's playing his StarCraft games and going, gee, golly gosh, I should get my refineries later. But of course, for this example, I'm going to say that he does, because, you know, it's my show. And he's now getting these bunkers. Good timing on this, getting the orbital command. Did he sync up the energy? Oh, look at that. 51 energy. And right as this finishes, 50 energy. Oh my god, I appreciate your timing, you young budding Terran Star. Again, if we see some sort of immortal action coming early on and we're worried about Colossi, we can just plop down 4 tech labs very quickly. We have just enough gas to about do that right now. 3 bunkers going down. I think 3 bunkers is appropriate if your opponent's going for some sort of 4 warp gate stuff, but based upon what Kawhi is seeing, which is pretty much... well, he actually hasn't seen anything. I think he could get away with fewer, or he could even get away with throwing an expansion down, so he could save money on this stuff, because you don't really need these bunkers if your opponent's going for this sort of composition early on. At least I don't think so with these 4 barracks. It seems implausible to me. Whoopsie daisies, getting a little supply blocked, but that's okay. It happens to the best of us, and it happens to me too. Getting more bunkers. Look at him, he's going hog wild. What is he seeing here? That's what I'm curious. What is going on here? And what is Az seeing? I guess both players are cheating a little bit. You know, they've played a lot of games in a row with each other. So naturally, they're gonna rely on their previous knowledge without necessarily wanting to. I like, for instance, that we have an observer coming out here, because even though you might not necessarily be using the observer against this crazy fast 4 racks build, it's good to get, because in a real game, you would want to be getting the observer anyways. So in a sense, you're eating into your own ability to perform well against this specific build, because in a real match, you don't know specifically what he's doing. So you shouldn't take advantage of those things, or as I like to call it, you shouldn't cheat. Getting a whole bunch of bunkers down. Easily able to defend all this stuff. But I'm actually curious how he's going to be able to deal with this. He's getting some SCVs ready. Look, he's hopping up on the high ground. Uh-oh. Throwing down a force field. Force field would have been better planted. Nyah. So that way nothing could pop down. Trying to do some little micromanagement here, trying to snipe out some guys. But really, if he just unloaded all these things and took his SCVs, he could crush this, no problem whatsoever. That's a little cute. That's definitely the sort of stuff that you see when you're playing against someone a million times in a row, where you're just like, you know what, let me give this thing a shot. Transitioning to factories. Now, in the midst of this battle, most people, I think, would watch this, and they'd be focusing all their attention here. But because we have the ability to pause stuff, coming back here, look at this. Still 1 refinery, no refinery here, no refinery here or here. Meanwhile, we see the KawaiiRice is still teching and is dead broke in gas. A lot more even than he was in that first game. So that, I think, is some cool stuff going on. Uh-oh, trying to run up the ramps? Unburrow. Whoopsie daisies. So obviously not going to work so well. And this might look a little silly, what Protoss is doing right now, but this is the sort of testing that if you do it enough times in a row, you will have a lot more comfort with early expanding, because you know definitively that you have a lock on your expo. You're not going to die to anything early. Because I think the hardest thing is not overreacting in a strategy game. It's not seeing that your opponent's doing something and going, oh my god, I could lose to that, and I didn't really think about it, and then just, you know, building 8 bunkers or something crazy like that. You know, I remember there was one game where my plan as Protoss was to get the Colossus out really fast, try to do some stuff, but only to get that 1 Colossus and then throw down an expansion of my own. And what happened is I got the Colossus, and when I sent my observer into the Terran's base, he built like 10 turrets to deal with the Colossus, because he wanted to defend from all these angles. He had like 4 turrets ringing his expo. He had units, or he had bunkers everywhere trying to make sure he could adequately defend against it. And I was just like, whoa, okay, and I didn't attack, and I ended up winning just because he invested way too much money. By the way, I unmuted the chat, so feel free to ask some questions. This one's going to be ending a little bit early today, but, you know, no big deal. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. But I think that the defense thing is a little bit obvious, like, oh, don't overreact defensively. But I think another thing that players tend to see is if there is some strategy that they've been struggling with, they tend to go nuts and go all in. Like, let's say I'm KawaiiRice and I've been practicing a whole bunch, and I have been doing this early expansion build, and I can hold off everything except the Colossus Rush. I'll see it and I'll go, oh my god, and I'll try to send everything, I'll try to win immediately, and if the Protoss can hold, I'm dead. I might not figure out some sort of huge transition that would be able to defend everything easily. Or should I say a straightforward transition that would be able to defend everything easily. I'm going to mute the chat here and just finish up blabbing about this because we have some neat stuff in the chat already. Whoa, my chat's going haywire. Moderator chat only, damn it. Well, eventually it'll come up. It looks like my thing's lagging like crazy. Sorry, I will return to my point. It's so easy to just overreact in a situation. Even unconsciously, it's very easy to overreact. And I think one of the best things ever is when you can look at a situation and say, yeah, I can hold it off, and you just feel comfortable. I mean, look at Zerg vs. Protoss right now in Brood War. Watch all the pro matches that have been playing themselves out recently. The Zerg player gets 5 hatcheries and 3 bases before he makes any units. The Protoss has teched all the way up to Templar before he makes really any cannons at all. That seems ridiculous, right? That seems to an outsider to be impossible. However, both the Zerg and the Protoss have this inner comfort where they go, oh no, I've tested this, I've seen other players test it, I know that I'm safe here, and they're able to play out their builds intelligently. So what's so nice about the Protoss doing these weird antics where he's warping into the high ground, really trying as hard as he can to break KawaiiRice early, is that KawaiiRice has that intelligence now. He has that information and he can say, no way, I'm totally safe completely. And then he might even start cutting back on these bunkers. And what'll naturally happen is that you'll end up with a loss where you're like, I shouldn't have assumed that I was so safe. And that's fine. I think that's normal. But it's better to just feel safe and lose and say, oh, yeah, I could have just thrown in another defense instruction, would have been fine. As opposed to just panicking like mad and ending up with some really obnoxious losses. And worse, not learning why that was a big deal in the first place. So I will now return to the channel and see this stuff. Looks like people were typing things in underline, which makes it very hard for me to read. Please, just regular text. I just like regular text. BDF92 says, upon seeing the 4-ax fast expand with an observer, don't you think the Protoss should have instead been keeping the gateway units or should have been keeping the gateway units and doing some sort of tech to Dark Templar, High Templar. DTs, they're slow, but they do have the bonus that, if the Terran's not making missile turrets, you can kill them. I'm actually going to sum this up a little bit more because it's kind of a multi-part thing, but I think the question centers around the idea of Dark Templar and High Templar as a good transition. I think that is a fantastic transition against this sort of this build in particular, but also in against Terrans in general, because first you get the Twilight Council to get the Dark Templar tech right away, and what happens is the Terran needs to scan in order to push you early on, so you're safe, you can expand, you don't even need that many gateways, you can get away with 1, maybe even 2. You can even take a second expansion early on, and you just go hog wild with your powering and your econ. Throw down a forge, get some, +1 upgrade, especially if you see your opponents going for some sort of 4 barrack stuff early on. So also what BDF noted is that, if you opened up with that robotic facility and scouted them, could you then transition into it? Because obviously you won't get the intel to do that unless you do end up getting that observer. I think it's okay to get the observer and go straight for DTs, or you can just go straight for the DTs against Terran. Completely acceptable thing to do. Additionally, if you go for the DTs, you've already gotten half your tech for the High Templar, so you just smoothly transition into the High Templar, which demolish Marine Marauder armies very well, and you just go for mass gateways. I think is one of the more common transitions we're seeing Protosses do nowadays against Terran. Great way to play. Love that sort of transition, especially on Desert Oasis. You have these 2 huge lanes that are really hard to make any attack against. So as Protoss, don't attack. Just get 2 DTs on either side. The first DT, if he scans it, he kills it, but then he has a second DT he has to work through. And then you can even send DTs through that middle path on Desert Oasis and force him to waste all these scans, and then he's pretty much doomed. And even if he does save up his scans, that's tons of minerals he's not getting from those mules. So it ends up balancing it out pretty well. So, Oh, great question by Joel1031. On Kulas Ravine, would expanding to the walled-in area be best because of the double choke at your natural? So I am torn on this. This is actually something I've thought a lot about. Because the issue with expanding to the double choke is that you have to kill off the destructible rocks at your backside at some point. So what I would say is there are a lot of builds where you do early aggression of some sort. There's like a timing push. And then you kind of have to fall back. I think the best example of this is Terran vs. Zerg on Kulas Ravine, doing the fast Hellion push where you get the reactor at your barracks and you land the factory there. With your barracks, you build a tech lab and you start getting Marauders there, and you're getting the Hellions to do all this harassment, and you're eventually going to do a push with Marauders and Hellions against the Zerg. But until you get that critical number of units, you use the Marauders to just rally to that back choke to kill off the destructible rocks. And then you can make a command center and float it there equally easily. However, if you're doing something like KawaiiRice, we're trying to get these 4 barracks out early, it's so hard to defend without killing off those destructible rocks, and it's hard to kill it off if you're going for 4 barracks. So let's say you're not doing some sort of early timing push. How does it make it okay to... Or let me say it again. So if I'm doing an early timing push, it's okay to take this walled-in back natural. But what about the wide open area in the front? A little bit harder, so that's why if I'm taking that expo, I want to do what KawaiiRice did, where I get these 4 barracks out super quickly, and the fact that it's these wide chokes matter less, because I just have so much stuff. If I was doing, again, something a little bit cutesy-techy, trying to use some well-positioned siege tanks, he can come in from so many angles that I'm just doomed. Gonna sip some green tea and muse on this next question. So Miggy says, hey Day9, regarding the early Terran wall-off, I think it seems helpful versus a fast 2-gate Zealot rush, as I think KawaiiRice will mostly be constructing his command center and the extra barracks by the time the first Zealots make their way in. With the wall-off of the first few Marines, it seems a lot more sturdy against the Zealots. And you know, that is something that something to consider. I don't know, so I do agree with Miggy's statement that 2-gate Zealot rushes are really hard to deal with as Terran if you're not walled in. That's why most players just sort of default wall in to make sure they don't lose to anything stupid. But a big question is, how often are players going for these sorts of 2-gate Zealot rushes? Think about Protoss vs. Terran in StarCraft 1. Sure. Actually, that's... Okay. There's so much to say there, so I'll just go ahead and say it. In Protoss vs. Terran in StarCraft 1, Terran players walled in almost all the time against Protosses. Except after years and years of playing, no Protoss Zealot rushed. All Protosses pretty much teched, and those supply depots that were being used in the wall-off at the ramp were just really obnoxious for a lot of mobility once you got to the mid-game. A lot of times they were free kills for a well-microed Reaver. So players started to favor not walling in as often. However, people responded to this by doing some proxy 2-gate rushes in the middle of the map. And how did the Terrans deal with it? Well, they just microed well back in their main bases. And notice that in that transition over time, in that history of the wall-in and Protoss vs. Terran, the Terrans basically said, you know what, I'm just going to try to figure out a way to hold off 2-gate rushes in my main, because it's just too obnoxious to deal with supply depot losses in the later stages of the game. So right now, as Miggy's mentioning this 2-gate Zealot rush, I'm still thinking to myself, but can KawaiiRice deal with those losses of supply depots if his opponent pushes with Immortals early on? A lot of times that will be a free supply depot 100% of the time. So what KawaiiRice might respond by doing is positioning his supply depot and barracks inside of his base in a way that he can still hold off Zealot rushes. There are cute ways that you can position your barracks behind your mineral patch with a supply depot in order to defend that. So that might be a little bit of a better option. It might both be able to defend the Zealot rushes and be able to defend these Immortal pushes. So Genexus says, what would be the best way to spend your gas? Should you get some sort of early geysers? Kawhi went tanks. Are there better options? You've probably heard me say multiple times in this cast, I want an opportunity to be aggressive against the Protoss player. Tanks seem like a solid but slightly more passive transition because you'll need to be doing sieging, unsieging. Or you might just be pushing aggressively with them. So I do like teching up towards the medevacs very quickly, and I like getting all the upgrades, right? All the upgrades I think is a great way to spend all your gas, especially if you want to do some sort of Mondo push with all your Marine Marauders. I mean, now you have the concussive shells, you have stim, you have the combat shield, plus 10 life upgrade for the Marines, and you want to get medevacs too. Wow, that's all the gas that I can think of in the world. So I definitely like that as a choice. Yeah, we've been going for about 50 minutes, so I will just take a few more questions right here. So this is a broad question, but I definitely will take it. Horde says, "Do Muslim recently made a thread asking for advice in Terran vs. Protoss. What are your thoughts about the matchup in general? In particular, why make Immortals if Protoss scouts 4 racks, no tech lab? Why not fast expand as Protoss, or one base as Terran?" So my general thoughts on the matchup is there is some big changes going on both sides. That like some violent, crazy swings in terms of what trends are going on, with players all going Warp Gate as Protoss, and then swinging to 100% mass Warp Gate, to now splitting 50-50 between the two. I think a good way to sum it up now is, given the recent changes on the concussive shells, Terran has a lot more of a timing push feel to them as they did in StarCraft 1. So there's a lot more defending that goes on early against Immortals and Warp Gates, and then a lot of pushes back against the Protoss in those mid-game stages. So I think the biggest things that are affecting the matchup are, no matter what strategy you're doing as Terran, how do you hold off early Warp Gate pushes and some obnoxious antics with Immortals? And from the Protoss point of view, how do you hold off mid-game stim pushes? Because in my experience with dealing with any sort of 4 Warp Gates, it's always an issue holding it, if I'm one basing or if I'm early expanding. But once I've held it, the push back, Protosses lose like so close to like 100% of the time. And of course they might just be getting greedy. But I think in the matchup in general, there's this, Terran can do some stuff early on, then it's Protoss who can do all the good stuff, and then it's Terran coming back with the stim. I think there's a lot of cool stuff that can happen in there. So a vague question, but again, I think it largely revolves around the stim and concussive shell upgrade. And whenever Protoss ends up taking his first expansion. So let's take Fabulous's question. He says, "Hey Dana, I was wondering how this fast expand build would do towards a fast Warp Prism build. Namely some sort of Dark Templar harassment, maybe even a Colossus drop like the Reaver. Although there are 2 orbital commands, it seems like he uses all the energy on the mules rather than a scan. So it would make it harder to hold off those Dark Templar. So I think the Colossus drop is the biggest concern for this build. For any of you who don't know what I'm talking about, you can watch, I believe it was the Little One versus De Muslim from the Team Liquid Invitational replay pack, where the Little One got a fast Colossus drop. It looked like a lot like a fast Reaver drop in Brood War, and he just harassed the mineral lines like crazy, and there was not that much that the Little One could do about it because he mainly had Marauders. I think that in this build, it might be favorable if you see some sort of ultra-fast robotics facility to not get the 4th barracks, just to stick to 3 barracks, and to get an engineering bay up early, to throw guys and gas early on, get the +1 upgrade, and get some turrets so you can deal with these drops a little more easily, so you can deal with these Dark Templar a little more easily. So from the Protoss' point of view, the question about the fast Dark Templar, the fast Reaver, be very careful when you think about those options, because notice how I just whipped up a counter by cutting that barracks, that 4th barracks out of the equation, realizing that you're safe against someone who's going for a fast Immortal build just with 3 barracks. So with any sort of strategy, try to make sure that there's not some easily counterable way. With the Warp Prism Colossus drop, I think it's still going to be strong. I think you can still force him to do things that he doesn't want to do. I think you can still kill off things, but it's the follow-up with the Expo that I think is going to be most critical when you end up doing those builds. And Dark Templar dropping, I'm a little bit more on, just because it's very crushable when you have that many Marines, because you can shoot the Warp Prism, and if he drops the Dark Templar, you scan, you try to run back from the Warp Prism, the Marines shoot it down anyways. So you know what? That is going to wrap up Day 9 Daily number 101. I would like to sincerely thank all of you for checking it out. For any of you who want to watch Day 9 Daily number 100, it's up on Blip TV. It will also be in the on-demand thing that's on live stream here. So please send Day 9 Daily number 100 to all you have ever known and met, and let them know how a poor little grad student had a very awesome life thanks to StarCraft. So hey guys, rest well and be merry. No, you know what? For any of you who have seen The Princess Bride, I will close with my favorite line from that movie. Gentlemen, rest well and dream of large women.